Hey, so we wanted to talk about arthritis or musculoskeletal stuff because both of you and I share a little bit of a knowledge, common knowledge on that, but then the coronavirus. So I just got back from a little bit ago. I went tried to go to Costco to buy some things, and I wasn't planning on like buying all the toilet paper in the store, but I literally there were no carts left. The parking lot was completely full. I looked in, I walked in, I thought I'd go in, and I saw the line was as long as I've ever seen in my life, and I said, I don't have time for this. I reason there it was in the morning. I guess they're all buying things before things run out. But one of the things I see is because we're getting this, we're closing churches, we're closing schools, we're closing sporting events, we're closing meetings and gatherings, but everybody's going to the grocery store. So I mean, it's like you're still getting people. Are they going to close the grocery stores next? I'm just wondering how we're going to. I mean, where the insanity ends because it's kind of like. This sort of we're all going to be exposed to it like we are of almost every virus out there all year long constantly. I mean, I think exposure rate is still going to. I don't think we're going to do much with this. What are your thoughts, Gary? Let's talk about the corona.
I've been interested in this. Obviously, personal survival is your first thing, which is why all low carbing and down the carnivore path in some respect. It's all about self-interest and taking an interest in your own health. I stuck my head out several weeks ago on the basis of a mouse study done on influenza A that halved the mortality of influenza A. So influenza A, for instance, that kills about 20,000 people a year in the US, about 500,000 people worldwide, and it's like it's a virus. It's a respiratory sensitive virus, and it tends to kill a lot of people with the similar comorbidities that the coronavirus is. So elderly, diabetic, respiratory disease, heart disease. And there's been an enormous amount of work done on influenza A. And in fact, there was a fair amount of work done on H1N1, which is the swine flu, in 2009. And the patterns of disease spread, the patterns of the people affected, and even the symptoms are similar. There's no question that this current coronavirus is aggressive and probably more aggressive than some other influenza viruses and other previous coronaviruses. However, the hysteria associated with it is amazing. I saw an image yesterday about how many media comments have been made about swine flu, how many were about Ebola, and there was something like 1,000 more media comments or media coverage than has ever been before for something which is definitely serious. And I agree with you. I think this is going to be endemic within the next 2 years. I think we're all going to be exposed to it. It's just a matter of being exposed to it. For the vast majority of people, it's almost subclinical. Something like 80% of people in contact get a very mild cold. They're going to be kids running around, people in the community catching up with others and actually passing it on. And then there's going to be that other 18 or 19, 20% of people who are going to get crook with it, of which 2%, 3% are actually going to end up in hospital requiring intensive care management. Yes, it's serious. But when you start looking at the cross-section of people who are dying, and that a paper that came out of JAMA last Monday, so Monday a week ago, that looked at the deaths associated with it. So if you're elderly and if you had heart disease, you had an increased risk, 10-fold increased risk, diabetes 7-fold, hypertension 6%, respiratory disease, not 6%, 6-fold increase. And lung disease was also a major factor there. Remembering this is in China where there's a high smoking population and a lot of respiratory disease to start with from environmental factors. So in that at-risk population, the vast majority of us are not in that, and certainly our children aren't, and our grandchildren are not. They're very, very low risk. So I've been looking, that's the current situation. I don't know if you saw overnight, or I've just picked it up this morning. I see that they've just closed the last temporary hospital in Wuhan because they've gone from some thousands of new cases per day down to 15. So that, it's almost as though sure, it's been messy the last several weeks, but Wuhan closed the temporary hospitals down today. So we've got data about the people who are dying at the moment. It's pretty well elderly. Not all up, but significant amounts of elderly who have got a lot of the features of metabolic syndrome, which is a background topic we've been talking about for years. I've been looking back at H1N1, swine flu. I've been looking at influenza. I've been looking right back to articles related to the Spanish flu in 1918, and which killed the Spanish flu. I think it killed. I wrote a figure down here. I think it was about 20 million people. Where was it? Yeah, something like 20 to 50 million people worldwide died in 1918. It's a horrible disease, and it affected the entire population. But again, the majority of people who died who were susceptible. So stuff we've actually looking at, because I've got this interest in it. If you are obese, if you're overweight with influenza A, so that's the big one that comes around every year, that carries about a 1.45 times increased risk of dying, catching it and dying it. And then if you're actually morbidly obese, so a BMI more than 35, then it gets up above 2.2. Those significant factors. And then if you start looking around it again, back in the 1940s, they actually used metformin as a drug to treat influenza. This is before metformin was being used in diabetes. And they started recognising right through, found some articles 2013, studying the effect of glucose metabolism on influenza A. And guess what? If you've got higher glucose loads to influenza, the virus proliferates and you do poorly. And if you lower the glucose rates, like glucose levels at a tissue level, the patient does better and the virus does worse. Metformin being used, if your obesity doubles the rate, diabetes is a major risk factor. These are all issues of glucose metabolism and problems with the host. And so I think we're all going to be exposed to coronavirus, just like I've caught me, I snaffled down some food before I talked. So we're all going to be exposed to coronavirus, as we're all exposed every year to a major number of effects. And if you can improve the host situation, which is what you can do for your own health every day, then there's quite a bit of stuff out there, particularly on lymphocyte function and neutrophil function, which are the white cells. And if you're in ketosis, those T cells, the T lymphocytes, which fight viral infection, are functioning a lot better. That's probably all I can say about it. I mean, it's a lot there. If you're in a good metabolic health and you're young, you're going to have good immunity. But at a very specific level, that study that came out of Yale University last year showing that a state of ketosis in mice, and I realise it was a mouse study, was incredibly protective, of halving mortality, decreasing viral load, decreasing inflammation, and with less weight loss. So, I think I sent a tweet out the other day. So, when coronavirus hits you, are you going to be in ketosis? Your choice.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's, we see that, Gary. I mean, in the orthopedic literature, they talk about hosts, like for, osteomyelitis. And I mean, there's all kinds of, we know that a strong host is going to be resistant to any kind of diseases. I posted a study that came out, I think, February 18th, looking at, different food compounds that happen to be in meat, things like carnosine and anserine and, carnitine and creatine, all these things, and they all have a immunoprotective benefit. They seem to, help our immune system. And there's actually been interventional studies looking at adding things like carnosine and seeing improvements in influenza outcomes and Zika outcomes and H1N1 outcomes. So we know that nutrition plays a role. It's surprising that, not that we should diminish the benefits of washing our hands and having regular hygiene and not sneezing on people and so on and so forth, not, but realizing that we are all going to likely be exposed to it, or, there's a very high chance you will be exposed to it. So whatever you do, you're going to be exposed to it. So being the most vibrant, resistant host you can be is probably the best long-term strategy. And this goes for any disease, quite honestly. Infectious disease.
The only thing I've tweaked in my practice is on the days that I'm consulting and seeing patients, I fast. I mean, I like eating, I like breakfast. But on those days, and I've been measuring my ketones. So on the days that I'm consulting, and I'm going to be spending more time with patients, I'm actually really well, by the way. I've just caught something here in my throat.
He's a coronavirus denier. There he is. He's secretly.
That's all right. Yeah, don't lick your screens, anyone. Okay. So on those days, I'm fasting, and my ketone levels are higher in the afternoon. They're normally higher in the afternoon, but I'm doing that as much to play with that concept. If I was a healthcare provider working with people infected with coronavirus, I would be in a state of ketosis. And I think it's interesting. I think that's what I'm sort of advocating. Put yourself in the best possible situation that experimental studies suggest. I can't prove that you're going to be protected. I don't think we can ever do that. You're still going to get infected, but chances are you're going to get less viral load, less inflammation, and have a bit more control of your outcome. Sure, I'm washing my hands, and we're not coughing and sneezing on anyone. But there's a rush on masks in the hospital, and hand sanitizer, and toilet paper disappearing. I worked out. I don't know if you saw. I worked out the options there. Personally, I'm just going to the hospital and doing my ablutions, so I don't have to use up my home toilet paper.
There you go. That's right.
But I think carbohydrate's bad for you. So I mean, so I think there's a good use for bread now.
A good use for bread. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, thinly sliced. Belinda said, "Don't put it up on Twitter," and I said, "Oh, it's gone too late."
Well, I think somebody did something similar, like with Pete Evans' books and some other people's books. They said they could use that for toilet paper. I can't remember. That was put up on.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was another surgeon here in Australia, and she, what she put up was unscientific and a bit of a low blow. I actually had a go at Nikki and said, "Have you forgotten biochemistry? Your degree was based on biochemistry." And she was having a go at Pete Evans, Jason Fung, who else was on that list? Mark Hyman.
Yeah.
And just wrong. Anyway, she copped a bit of a backlash, I think.
What, so, I mean, you are, still, what's going on in your practice now? Are you full capacity, full-time, 7 days a week practice? You kind of, what's going on with you?
Well, I try and take off weekends to have a rest, but effectively, full-time orthopedics.
Yeah, okay. Have you seen any shift in orthopedics locally in Australia as far as giving nutrition any kind of thought? Because I mean, when I look through the orthopedic literature, it's really rarely, if ever, discussed. I mean, you have to go look at some of the sort of the bench research before you see any of that sort of making headway.
It's completely bereft. We're still ignoring it as a profession, and that's wrong. At a passive level, we have a joint registry here in Australia, and you have to write down, if you do a hip replacement or a knee replacement, you have to write down the diagnosis, whether or not it's osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. And my passive movement there is that every osteoarthritis patient I write, that I do a joint replacement, I tick the box other inflammatory arthritis, because we need to change that whole shift away from osteoarthritis being a pure wear and tear problem back to where it should be, which is that it's an inflammatory arthritis. And there's so much good literature out there pointing at that. And there was a great article only about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I think you were copied in on it. It was a Chinese study done on knee osteoarthritis patients. So a human study and looking at the role of insulin.
Yeah.
And I think that was a blow-away article.
Yeah, it was the one talking about the synovial sites, right? Yeah. I mean,
So under being, and I know that that article has not come from the low-carb community because I think they missed the point. What they did pick up was that synovial sites, which are the lining cells of a knee joint, of all joint, and they provide the lubricating fluid, that's actually the site of inflammation. And inflammation over a long period of time drives poor joint health, and then that wears out. And what they showed was that that was under the direct influence of insulin. And they fiddled around with that. And so when they increased insulin, there was more inflammation. When they decreased insulin, there was less inflammation. And their conclusions at the end of it were we should be targeting insulin in the management of osteoarthritis, which is the vast majority of hip and knee replacements that we do, and wear and tear problems. And the best way to target insulin is to have a low insulin requirement diet, which by definition is avoiding sugar, carbs, and processed food. Now that study built on top of some other experimental stuff that's been around for a fair while, and showing higher rates of osteoarthritis and diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and insulin resistance. That study, to me, is actually just giving me the biochemistry of what I've been seeing now for years. That people reduce their pain and inflammation before they lose weight. I had sort of by way of anecdote. I mean, this lady gave me permission to tell a story. And I saw her before Christmas. She's a 75-year-old woman, independent, bare bone in her knees, bare bone in her shoulders, hobbled in. Her daughter's a paramedic who's actually low carbing and doing really well. And she gave me permission to give her mother both barrels of the shotgun, figuratively speaking. And so she came in and I chatted to her and I said, look, she was overweight. She was drinking a bit of alcohol. And I said, look, you've got to take this seriously. Anyway, 3 months down the track, she came in. She'd lost about 10 kilos of weight. She literally danced through the doorway. She had no pain in her knees, no pain in her arms. She literally just came in and waved her arms up like this and said, hey, thanks, Doc. And I said, look, you need an operation. You know, I need to operate on your knees. I need the money. And she said, well, not on me, Sonny. So, and what had happened, as you've seen, I've seen, many have seen, her pain was reduced dramatically before she lost weight. And I see that over and over. A couple of weeks ago, I saw 5 patients on it. I can remember the Tuesday, I came home to Belinda and I said, I've seen 5 patients that in the previous 6 or 8 weeks, I'd given them 1 injection of cortisone, whether or not it was a shoulder, a knee, or an ankle. I'd said, go low carb, gave them the handout that I give out. And all of them came back in within that sort of time frame saying, look, I'm much, much better. I want to keep going. They hadn't lost much weight, but 1 cortisone shot, change of diet, and that improved. 5 years ago, all 5 of them would have had operations. So I'm operating less than I used to be. Am I full-time orthopedics? Yeah, I am, but I'm operating less. But when I do operate, the patients are generally in better nick.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. I found that the same thing was occurring. People, no pain without any, almost no significant weight loss, and the pain goes away. And as I've been doing this now for several years and is collecting story after story, I mean, this is one of the most common things we see when people go low carb, keto, carnivores, or joint pain just resolves. And I think it's remarkable. The other thing is, when we look at the demographics, in the U.S., who's getting the knee replacements, it's, very often females that are obese, that are in their 50s, late 50s, 60s, and they're not athletes doing pounding. I mean, they're sedentary for the most part. So the wear and tear sort of argument, I find, because they're not doing anything. And then we also got this, what about neck arthritis? What about hand arthritis? Where does the mechanical stress come from? Is your head got so fat that you can't hold it up and your neck's,
yeah, I mean, see, carpal metacarpal osteoarthritis at the thumb.
Yeah, yeah.
That's completely, that's osteoarthritis. It's not, it's an inflammatory arthritis, but that's
Right.
completely linked with hip and knee. In Australia, 89.9% of knee replacements are done on patients who are overweight and obese. That's our last joint registry results. And 74% of hip replacements. And the vast majority of those people are now becoming what I call younger women. So it's the same demographic. But that's data from our joint registry. Now we are operating on obese young women with knee replacements, and that in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, one of my practice things, subspecialty, is to do revision knee replacements. So when knee replacements wear out, in northern Tasmania, I've done a lot of them, and that's a disaster. You know, getting over one knee replacement's hard work, but when that one wears out, you need another one, whether or not it's infected or worn out or stuff. You're in strife, and so if you can avoid the first one, you can avoid the second. And if you've ever done enough revision knee replacements, then ultimately they fail, and you've actually got to either fuse the knee or amputate the leg. And yeah, that's why you and I are on this. This is coalface stuff. We're surgeons that actually see the results of metabolic disease and diet over a long period of time.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the comments here, Gary. I just, from the people in the peanut gallery here, and we've got Rick is saying, the pain relief in my knee has been the biggest win of going low carb last year. It's only gotten better as I moved to carnivore. Said I'm squatting like I did when I was 15 to 20 years ago, totally pain free. Weight loss came after the pain was gone. So, I mean, this is, the same thing. We're just seeing this even in this small size here, and there's another one. Sarah's talking about a year and a half of dealing with de Quervain veins, and it's over in just 2 weeks doing carnivore. This is what it just amazed me, the things that I saw, like things like that, like, Quervain's, carpal tunnel syndrome, trigger finger, the arthritis in the knee and the shoulder and the hip, back pain just going away without, significant changes in the mechanics. I mean, this is because, we think we're carpenters. I mean, we're thinking about mechanics.
You're talking about carpal tunnel syndrome. Another real pet topic of mine. But, I don't know, before 1950s, there were only about 24 cases reported in the world literature. And we're seeing a 1% increase in carpal tunnel releases in Australia every year. And last year, I presented at an orthopedic meeting. There's a bit of controversy. I said, I think we're all missing the diagnosis. And I presented my last 71 patients that I did carpal tunnel releases on. And when you do the release, obviously, I know, you know what I'm talking about, but you release the palm. I used to do them endoscopically, telescopically, and then I stopped doing it. I did a couple of hundred of those, presented those. And for part of this was this reason. You release the palm, and then the nerve you find is compressed underneath in the tunnel. But then I moved the nerve, and I've looked at the flexor tendons underneath. And up until last week, the previous 80 patients, every single one of them had a chronic tenosynovitis. And when I actually picked up, I was able to cut out at least a teaspoon, inside a little wrist, a teaspoon of chronic synovitis, which is, I looked at it under the microscope, had it tested over and over. It's the same thing, but if you want to give it a term, looks like yellow snot, out of your nose. It's just thick and tendon. So I've been doing a synovectomy for the last 18 months on these patients. They still need nerve compression. The nerve's flattened. It's come at no morbidity. But I think we've been missing the diagnosis, and that the cause of carpal tunnel syndrome is not overuse. It's actually, there's a low-grade chronic teaspoon of extra material in something which is, a tunnel which is that size. And I mean, that was just eye-opening for me. A couple of years ago, because I was on this inflammation pathway looking. And carpal tunnel, I think that nerve needs to be released. They either respond really quickly to changes in lifestyle. But once you start getting wasting and weakness, I think that nerve still needs to be released. So we're not completely redundant as surgeons yet. But I've been finding this chronic low-grade inflammation. And the same, when you start looking at it, it's just there. But if you don't look for it, and that's the criticism of surgeons and the health professions, if you don't go looking for something, you won't find it.
Yeah, it's like, people say they've never seen these conditions, but those conditions have seen them plenty of times because
yeah, absolutely.
And I think the same thing we see with like ganglion cysts. I mean, the same thing, there's always some kind of tenosynovitis. So, and I apologize for you guys that we're talking in more technical language, but it's just inflammation around the tendons. The little coating of the tendons gets inflamed. And so you see swelling, and you see, this. I mean, that's the same thing we do for like a Baker cyst. We're not going to operate on Baker cysts typically because we see inflammation from the knee, or we tend not to want to do that just because it comes right back. And so you don't address, and we want to address the knee problem, surgically perhaps, or put them on anti-inflammatories. But if we were to do that the right way by changing diet, I think we would have more success.
A lot of foot and ankle stuff. I talk about, we've got orthotics and devices we can put inside the shoe or around the foot and ankle, which aims to decrease the load on the joint, but it's just as critical for the patient to decrease the load from above down on it. And if you can decrease the load and you can decrease the inflammation, then that's what you should be doing before you do any operating. So, I mean, we talk about inflammation, Sean, but when you and I talk to our colleagues, all we do is create inflammation. So that's called Bakeritis and Fettke-itis. I go to orthopedic meetings, and most of my colleagues, when I stand up to ask a question, they know what it's coming, and they start rolling their eyes beforehand. But all you can do is keep chipping away. It's changing our practices, but it's the right thing to do.
And I was going to ask you how you are received in meetings, because I just think there's enough of us. I mean, you just have them look through the different set of glasses, and look at it through a different sort of viewpoint, and then it becomes readily apparent. You said you can't unsee it once you've seen it, and you see it everywhere. And if you just get a couple more people just willing to look, they'll notice the same thing we do, because it becomes so obvious to us.
Well, I've had more success with my colleagues' wives, actually, than my colleagues. I've got quite a few of my colleagues' wives who are actually doing what I'm talking about. And their husbands are still in denial that their wives are healthier and feeling better and low-carbing and losing weight, and yet they won't acknowledge the fact that they're doing. It's quite interesting. Their wives are telling me, and the husband. One of my colleagues said, "Look, yeah, my wife showed me something that you put on Instagram the other day," and I said, "Good. I'm glad I'm screwing with your head." But the patients. Ultimately, the patients will make the decisions on this, and the medical profession are just slow. And Tim Noakes, myself, I suppose I'm in my frustrated phase again at the moment. I'm not frustrated with people. I'm not frustrated with information. I'm just frustrated the medical community is taking so long. And to the point now that I think it's getting embarrassing, particularly around diabetes management. But in orthopedics, we need to be doing something as well. So,
yeah, well, I mean, like I said, Gary, there's studies out there on ketogenic diets and low carb diets, and we'll have David Ludwig, we're going to be doing carnivore study. That's going to stop. I just talked to him yesterday. So they're just finishing through IRB. It'll be ready to go, and we'll start collecting data here in, a few months. But I think, what we're doing now, and like this little platform, we've got a physicians portal. We've got about 75 physicians that have signed up in the last few days to interact and kind of figure out how we can move it forward. Because obviously, if we just wait on the powers that be, the government, the industry-funded medical system, it's never going to happen. It's all about the shinier Band-Aid, the more slick way to do an ACL or the latest tool and technology. It's not about going back to the basics and preventing sick people. And this is, I think that's the biggest paradigm shift is we really have to say, how do we not have so many sick people? And rather than what we can do with high-tech stuff to fix them, we got to start creating sick people.
Look, at the moment, we're just band-aiding. The system is just being band-aided. And we need to go to the root cause, and the root cause is metabolic syndrome. It's how we fuel ourselves. Until we get that right, we're going nowhere. I suppose, the good thing about this, where coronavirus is at the moment, is it's actually making us all reset our health equations. I mean, I haven't heard a lot from the vegans in the last 6 weeks. It's really interesting. It's quieting down. There's a whole lot of politics about this, the environmental aspects. There's a reduction in greenhouse gases emissions, particularly over China, major reduction in flights. We haven't worked out the ramifications of this step change in the social issues around coronavirus. I've been talking about the fact that there's going to be a shift in society. I've been talking about that for 10 years. Yes, we're changing and things are not sustainable on so many fronts, but I actually see that what's happening right now is a shift, a whole, almost a cliff that we're all going over, and we're going to be reassessing what we're doing in our own lives. I mean, I've just been chatting to our kids in Melbourne over the last couple of days, but where they want to work, how much work they can do from home, how much work they can do from travel, where the economics are. We're watching right now a major unfolding society. I mean, it's down a bit of philosophical path, but what everyone's hankering for is they're hankering for health, because now they feel vulnerable. And the number one thing you want is your health. The number one thing you want is security for yourself and your family. And it's amazing how all this other noise has all of a sudden gone on the back burners. Politics is out the window. The environment's out the window. Everyone's hankering down to let's just sort out our own lot, And so I think personal health is what everyone's actually realizing is incredibly important. And I'm seeing, and you and I know that I talk about this, the biochemistry, what happens inside a cell, inside a mitochondria, where the energy, food's turned into energy, that's science. What happens outside of a mitochondria, what happens outside of a cell, is being politicized, emotionalized, become assaulted by religious ideology. And that, Belinda, I think you caught up with her. It's got nothing to do with science. And so what's happening is, in this major shift at the moment, a whole lot of that BS, economics, politics, ideology, is going to the side, and people actually want to know how they can get better. And so what we're talking about is based on biochemistry. This is how we fuel our bodies, and we wanted to do it in the cleanest possible way. And I actually see that the next 6 months will be really, really interesting for our community, because I think we're going to be healthier. At least theoretically, we should all be healthier.
I think that's certainly going to make more people think. We get people that, we always see these tragedies occur and people reevaluate their life and their goals, and then it kind of fades with time. I have not seen the government react in such a strong way. I mean, this is unprecedented what we're doing. I mean, it's like, we think we're dealing with the Spanish flu perhaps, but so you wonder what's going on forward. I mean, is it going to be every grocery store or store you walk in from now on will mandate have hand sanitizer for you walk in there, and we're going to change the way we don't shake hands and we fist bump from now on, and people are going to go out less, and Amazon is going to get more money because everybody's going to be ordering everything online, and no one's going to go to restaurants and grocery stores. And is that going to happen? And is that a good thing? I think that one of the people talk about what's the problem here. We have, the bottom problem here with infectious disease is the same thing that happened with the Black Plague. I mean, it's just there's so many people living in one place. I mean, that's the issue. And so do you mandate population densities? You know, because we have, Australia, you've got, you know, just countless amount of area where no one lives, and then everyone's on the coast because it's nice. So we start to see rationing of, this space. I don't know. I mean, where we're going to go from that.
I don't want to tell you how much space we've got around us at the moment. I've got a few kangaroos out the window there. So, So if I need to go and hunt and gather them, I might have to. But another pet topic I've had for the last few months is actually looking at the agricultural revolution. So about 10,000 years ago, we started cropping and farming. And I use it by way of example because people say, don't you need carbs? And I said, well, actually, before the agricultural revolution, the only sources of carbs effectively were seasonal fruit, which you had to fight the animals and the insects and the birds for. Wild honey, if you wanted to get into a beehive and do that, and brave enough to do that, and breast milk, which is obviously not readily available to the entire population. And sure, we were nomadic and we were moving around, but when we started farming and cropping, then that was our first time we started actually storing carbohydrate. And when we stored carbohydrate, we then needed to protect it. We needed to protect it from animals initially, and then we needed to protect it from each other. And then we developed hierarchy, and then we developed community, and then we developed power, and all of those things. So, and what we now is at the other end of the extreme, which is, we've crowded into small communities, or, tight communities. And I don't know if Belinda yesterday was talking about, the temperance movement, that when people moved into the cities, then food needed to be transported in. So in the mid-19th century, that 1800s, farmers started moving into the cities. Meat needed to be transported because it couldn't be refrigerated properly. They tried salting it. By the time it got to the cities, it was rotten and putrid, and therefore that was part of the start of where meat is bad for you. But again, that's, I'm drawing a long, long bow here. I'm sort of saying, our problems in society came when we started storing carbohydrate. And the ability to store carbohydrate then allowed us to become communities. And sure, we've developed art and history and science all as a result of coming together and learning in academia. But it's just another way of looking at that whole thing of, do we need to now, with technology, separate away again, become less, tied up in big cities?
So I've got a question from Leah. She's asking, do you think there's a genetic sensitivity in older people versus asymptomatic people as far as getting severely ill? I mean, do you think there's genetics that play a role in immune defenses in this coronavirus issue?
I think across all immunity drifts downwards over time. There's a blood test called the ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, and that's a test which measures pretty well the amount of protein floating around, of damaged protein in the bloodstream. And as we get older, that level increases. And I think it's a marker of our fact that we've been breaking down and clearing stuff over such a long period of time that our immune systems are reduced. What I'm fascinated by is the whole concepts of autophagy and mitophagy, which is when the body clears itself. And as you know, fasting will actually make a big difference there. That fasting state actually allows people of all ages to actually, start clearing their cells out and their damaged mitochondria. And I've seen people in their 90s adopt LCHF, keto carnivore, and just feel fabulous. I haven't measured their immunity. It's really hard to measure their immunity. But, soft ways of measuring immunity are the CRP, C-reactive protein, and the ESR. And we do see, and that stuff, people talking about this in meetings, that CRPs are coming down. ESRs, I think, are going to take a lot longer to come down, but because of the amount of total protein floating around in the blood. But yes, when we get older, our immunity does go down, but I don't think it's irretrievable. I think it can be improved.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, there's some thoughts about, well, Leah's commenting about Neanderthals and germ spread, and she's trying to reconcile that. I don't know that it has much to do with what we're seeing today, but it's interesting to see how, you know, humans clearly we've co-evolved with viruses and bacteria, and we've clearly been exposed to them for, you know, the entire time we've been around. So, I mean, we have to have, you know, that's the one concern, you know, we have this sort of, you know, with this panic that we've all got to constantly be smothered in hand sanitizer. Are we now therefore, you know, making us, you know, there's this hormetic sort of theory in general that, you know, we have to be exposed to toxins, poisons to some degree, and that's going to, you know, make us more robust to when we get exposed to something.
I got sent an article this week, again related to H1N1, 2009, on the benefits of iodine. Iodine has a greater viral toxicity than alcohol. So we're all washing our hands, or, you know, using hand sanitizer. And I think hand sanitizer does decrease transmission. And I'm not, you know, disagreeing with the hand washing at all, but over a period of time, we are being, you know, that whole immune situation with children not being exposed to as many you know, antigens, as many bacterial and dirt loads in early childhood, it may in fact be detrimental. But I think that, you know, that's confounded by the fact that as a society we've been eating badly. And I think it's a lot to unravel whether or not it's a lack of exposure or too much exposure to dirt and bacteria and other antigens, or whether or not the host is in fact weaker. And, you know, whether or not it's not just that we're not eating well, we're not getting enough sunlight exposure, we're not getting the right, it's complex. That's all but to me, it's about eating well, sleeping well, getting some exercise, getting up into that high intensity of stuff, which improves insulin sensitivity, and getting that right amount of sunlight. I'm just fascinated that it's the whole picture. And what we're doing is in the coronavirus, and everyone keeps focusing on the virus rather than the host. We can improve our own immune function. That's our best defense. And our best defense is stopping the virus in its tracks. You know, at least slowing its, you know, its transmission around.
I'm just going to shift gears a little bit, Gary. I mean, you know, for those who don't know, you know, Gary was reprimanded. We talked about with Belinda yesterday, reprimanded for telling patients that were diabetic to cut back on sugar. I mean, it was just kind of ridiculous. But
it was ridiculous, but it happened. It took 6 years to clear my name. I was just crazy.
Yeah, I feel your pain. Believe me, in more way than one.
I know we've talked, but you know, but I was in fact targeted by the cereal industry. I was targeted by the processed food industry.
So currently in your practice, because I saw, you know, when I was still doing joint replacements, that the post-op, if I had people on what I thought was an appropriate diet, at that time was a low-carb ketogenic diet, I saw much better, you know, post-operative outcomes as far as pain, inflammation, range of motion, you know, decreased pain medication. Do you recommend that? Do you get how many is that something you as a blanket recommendation to all your patients, and how many of them are compliant, and then do you see results?
It's very hard to A, get in and see me without knowing my background story, and B, it's impossible to leave my office without getting, you know, hounded about it. It's now at a point of a no-brainer. This is the bike. I say to patients, I'm not going to argue this. I recommend this. I know that it works. It's effective. It's based on science. And if you hear that anything's dangerous about keto, and I use that term because that's less confrontational than carnivore. I say, if you hear anything controversial about keto, within 5 minutes, either myself or Belinda can track that back to the food industry or to ideology or profit. Okay, so But in my own community, people know that I'm going to go down that pathway. What do I see? I see some people adopt it. I see that the vast majority of society is carbohydrate addicted. You know, that they'll do it for a while and they fall back, and then they'll do it a while. One of the radiographers was telling me his wife's doing it, you know, strictly. He does it on and off because he keeps falling off the bandwagon. I always tell the story, one of our daughters, it took her a dozen times to give up, you know, binging on chocolate ice cream. She just, you know, was healthy, but just, oh, Dad, I've failed. And I said, no, you haven't failed. You just, you know, have another crack at it. And it took her some years to actually get around to getting it all sorted out. So what's my patient compliance level? Well, it's variable. But those people who do it, A, often avoid surgery. B, when they do come to surgery, a year down the track or 2 years down the track, the vast majority of them sail through it. You know, I agree with you. They have less pain. They appear to have less swelling. And if they've had one side done and then they have the other, they'll say, hang on, I've gotten over this one a bit quicker. Now, that's purely anecdotal. I might have gotten better as a surgeon. They might have gotten, you know, they may have forgotten what the last one was like or whatever. But yeah, I think as Eric Westman says, you know, it works. You know, if you do this, if you do it, it works. If it doesn't work, you're not doing it.
Yeah, I saw Eric a weekend ago. I guess it was just a week ago, right before they've closed every conference. He had a little ADAPT present, and I presented there up here locally in Long Beach, California. There was probably 100 people that we presented to, but yeah, I mean, Eric's a great, you know, I think very pragmatic about it. It just works, and I think that's, you know, what we see. Here's somebody just asking for advice. Tracy, she says, "Is there any tips on talking her diabetic dad into dropping carbs? Do you have a path that works, like a spiel that you would say that this actually gets things done?"
I've got about 100 different segues into the conversation now. I've even got a picture of the Queen Elizabeth, in front of my examination couch. When you sit on the side of the couch, you have to face that way, and there's a picture of the Queen. So, I mean, you know, not many royalists in the US, but nonetheless, the Queen is 93 now, and she's a low carber. And it just gets the people going. They sort of go, "Why have you got a picture of the Queen there? You know, are you a royalist or whatever?" So, no, she's my pin-up girl. I said, Belinda's allowed me to have her, you know, a picture of another woman up on the wall. And it's just a great segue, you know. It's got nothing to do with diabetes, but it is a segue. With diabetics, I have two things. I've got a few ways of bringing it around. One is I talk about putting the right fuel in the engine. I talk about a little bit about that, what we talked about before, about that there is no requirement in the body for us to eat carbohydrate, and before the agricultural revolution, there was none. The other two I use are related to fires, and the other ones is a piece of toast. So, but the wood fire one, as I say, look, if you've got a wood fire in Tasmania, a lot of people have had wood fires. I say, into the wood fire, I say, what do you put? And they say, we'll put in wood. And I say, well, you can have a choice then of putting in kindling, branches, or logs. And if you put kindling in, then you have to go up, down, up, down, up, down. Fire burns hot, cold. It's very hard to regulate. If you put branches and logs in, it burns slow and steady. And I say the same thing happens with the engine of the cell, the mitochondria, the fuel that requires. And I say this is the only biochemistry you need to know. It's a thing called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is the wood of the cell, and it can be equally sourced from carbohydrate, proteins, and healthy fats. I always throw the word healthy fats in, and I preface it so that people, you know, just trying to, you know, make it less controversial. I say if you put in carbohydrates, just like the kindling, you've got to go up, down, you're feeling hungry, and you're going to have to open and shut the door of that, and it's called insulin. And if you keep doing that to the door over time, it wears out, and then you're going to end up with insulin resistance. But if you put in proteins, which are the branches, and healthy fats, which are the logs, then it's going to burn slow and steady. And I see that getting in people's heads. They go, okay, I can see that. I don't need to just have carbohydrate. So I say, forget the guidelines. Nobody's ever going to die if they never have another carbohydrate again in their life. You know, it's nutrient poor, it's energy dense, it's just kindling on the fire. The other one is that piece of toast. Have you seen me talk about that, the Maillard reaction?
I might have, Gary, but you can, I'm familiar with Maillard reaction, but I mean, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so the Maillard reaction is something we've all seen. You know, it's the browning of a piece of food. So it'll happen on a steak, it'll happen on a piece of, but a piece of bread's a classical example. So you put a piece of bread in the toaster, under the effect of the heat, that piece of bread will go brown. And that's the Maillard reaction. It's called the glycosation of the glucose with protein. So the protein combines with the glucose under the effect of body heat. So the same thing happens in diabetes. When your blood glucose level goes up, your tissue glucose level goes up by about 2/3. And anything in excess of what the cell requires under the effect of body heat combines the glucose with the tissue protein. So in fact, every time your blood glucose spikes, you are effectively toasting your brain, your kidneys, your eyes, your tissues, your vessels. And I've actually got a piece of toast in my drawer in my office, which is about 4 years old. It has not gone mouldy, okay? And I keep bringing it out. It's hard and crusty. And I say, this hard, crusty piece of bread is what you're doing to your brain every time you have your cereal for breakfast, your sugar, you know, the occasional bit of sugar that can't possibly be healthy. Okay, it is. Every single time your blood glucose spikes, you are toasting your brain. And I find that a really, really useful way. Again, that's when I've got time and you've got to screw with their head a little bit. And people, it's a light bulb moment. You know, the wood fire, the piece of toast, the agricultural revolution. You know, I think that they're probably the big three. That's a long answer, but you've known me. I never give straight, short answers.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you're with the toast, you're in the brain and wherever you're alluding to these advanced glycation end products. And you know, like I said, and I think it's the statement I've made many times is I think tissue quality depends upon diet. You know, we see that. I mean, I think we see, I don't know what you experienced in your career, but I know as my career progressed, I kept seeing more and more, particularly like pediatric ACL injuries, and you're looking at why are these kids breaking earlier and earlier? Whereas when you got a 10-year-old with an ACL injury, you know, 30 years ago, it was a pretty rare event. And now it's becoming, you know, more and more common. And I think it has to do with, you know, a number of things, but I think diet plays a role. Would you agree that diet impacts our tissue quality and integrity of our tissues and susceptibility to injury?
Yeah, look, I'm going to get really nerdy. I apologise to everyone who's out there listening, but you're someone who might have noticed this as well. When you do knee arthroscopy and you look at the patellofemoral joint, that articulation between the kneecap and the femur, I reckon 30 years ago, I did not see much in the way of cartilage damage there, whereas I see it every time now. You know, virtually every time there's peeling back of that trochlear groove cartilage or the patella. And I bounced it off my colleagues and I said, look, I'm absolutely certain 25, 30 years ago, I did not see this in the amount that I see it now. So I see that as a softening of that cartilage and people are out pounding the pavement trying to get fit. 8 times your body weight goes through the patellofemoral joint. Have you seen that trochlear groove damage? And A, you're seeing it, and B, do you think it's more profound than it was 25 to 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think we see that, you know, that just across the board in all of that. But yeah, you know, you see things that, you know, it's you know, some people would argue, well, maybe the resolution on arthroscopy has gotten better, you know, and you know, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. I mean, it clearly has, but I mean, I do agree. I think you just see more and more of this stuff that, you know, that when you look in there and you see a meniscus that's yellow at age 35. I mean, you know what a 15-year-old meniscus looks pristine white, and by the time it's 35, it looks like it's been smoked. It looks like, you know, it looks like a cigarette's been, you know, burned. Something. And I think that's a Maillard reaction. I really do. I don't know why it's yellowing, but I think that's probably some of what we're seeing.
Oh, look, I just thought I'd bounce it off you because when I talk to my colleagues around here, they said, "Oh no, it's always been there." I said, "No, it hasn't. It hasn't." But my old files from 20 years ago, the pictures that I got out of there are really, not. I've thrown most of those 25-year files out. That's the trouble. Yeah, so I apologise to everyone who's listening there. That was just, orthopedic side chat.
That's okay. Well, Gary, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for coming on. Hey, keep doing what you're doing. I certainly appreciate it. I think people appreciate what you and I think hopefully what I'm doing. We are making a difference. I know we talked about it. Now we've got a million buzzing mosquitoes and flies. They can't swat us all away. So we've got more people have discovered this sort of thing, and we're going to continue to do that. And like I said, we're trying to, get more and more physicians, because, I think the vegans have been very well organized, and they've done a very good job of organizing through things like PCRM and, getting their political views, because it really is a political statement, politicizing their thing and being very effective with it and getting funded. That's what we have to do.
Well, we're not going to get it, Sean. As Belinda's works pointed out, behind the vegan movement is the processed food industry and religious ideology. But, we're up against massive big food and pharmaceutical. Not being paranoid, I'm just being pragmatic. We're never going to get a lot of fun.
I've said, for lack of a more elegant term, I've called the vegans the useful idiots of processed food companies, because I think that is really what is actually driving this, as we know, and it's kind of like pushing back from the human pet food diet that they want to put us all on. And so we have to kind of, it's going to be, we're kind of like the lower classes versus.
But as a result, we're actually okay with getting down and getting our hands dirty.
Yeah, I do it all the time. And I realize this is a propaganda war, and like I said, I think we need the science. The science is helpful. If it gets more physicians using these options for patients, that's great. But at the end of the day, this is really a battle not for you and me, but for our children and their children. I think the next few decades.
Well, that's why I think that arthritis article about synovial sites, only a month old, brilliant. That is the biochemistry. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I read that. I thought it was wonderful. I mean, seeing not only these inflammatory cytokines are produced in the presence of high insulin, but it just leads to, I've said that I thought arthritis is basically the musculoskeletal manifestation of metabolic disease rather than this wear and tear model. And I think there's a combination. Obviously it's post-traumatic arthritis, and there's people with significant deformity, but really, it really is an inflammatory biological model that we've basically ignored, or, because we can't, well, as I can throw a joint replacement in there, but that's what I can do. But to tell somebody to go stop eating sugar and eat, real food and steak it's not very lucrative for anybody.
No, not if you want to be a pure capitalist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we haven't done medicine for that reason. We're doing it for
yeah, exactly.
Leave the right legacy.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, Gary. Keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing you once this coronavirus silliness passes. We'll get together in some part of the world, hopefully. And
look, Sean, you look better on camera than you do up close, all right?
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. All right, guys. You guys have a good day. I'm not
going. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.